it's showtime in Loch Dhu.
Not bad, eh?
But when life imitates art,
Put my daughter down, boy.
it's up to Hamish to save the star-crossed lovers.
I mean, if Cameron Dix wants to, what is it, rumble? Then I say we rumble.
Love is in the air in Hamish Macbeth, tomorrow at 8 on BBC One.
Phyllis?
Sorry. Do it again?
In the episode of Casualty, shown on the 18th of March 1995, we featured a tanker with the name of Aquaforce on it. We'd like to make clear that the Aquaforce group of companies of Wolverhampton is in no way connected with the events portrayed in this programme, and we regret any embarrassment or distress that may have been caused to the company. BBC Two's tribute to the life and works of Oscar Wilde continues in 5 minutes with an illuminating personal history of the celebrated writer.
This patient's life hangs on progress.
Where's the catch? The temporary heart?
What hurt me? A monkey. It's in the hospital as we speak.
Here's your word. Don't act like
It's never been done before, and we risk condemnation.
What do I do? Just let the guy die?
Chicago Hope in 20 minutes.
That's after the news and sport from the BBC with Peter Sissons.
Labour's education spokesman is jostled and abused as he arrives to meet teachers at the NUT conference. David Blunkett says the Blackpool demonstrators are a loony fringe, but the union rejects his stand against classroom strikes. As an arrested Spanish trawler is brought into Plymouth, Canada prepares to resume her action after talks break down. And it's the same again for Rangers as Celtic lose and hand them the Scottish Championship. Good evening. Tensions between the Labour Party and Britain's biggest teaching union, the NUT, have been further highlighted during a visit to the union's annual conference by Labour's education spokesman David Blunkett. The Shadow Education Secretary was jostled by left-wing demonstrators when he arrived in Blackpool, and there was criticism of aspects of Labour's policies, as well as attacks on the government, from the conference platform. Later, Mr Blunkett spoke against teachers taking any action over rising class sizes that could damage children. But delegates went on to vote in favour of preparations for a campaign of action, including strikes.
Around 20 noisy protesters cornered Mr Blunkett in a room inside the conference centre. Some had delegates' badges, others appeared not to. They were angry at Mr Blunkett's recent comments about closing schools that are failing pupils. They wanted him to explain himself to the whole conference, not just the invited audience he was due to address.
We signed the petition. We want it going on in there. Because you're not doing any of it.
Union officials took 15 minutes to clear the protesters and release Mr Blunkett.
You must know that the National Union of Teachers is not party to what you're seeing going on there. It's a deplorable exhibition, and it can do nothing to gain support for education or for teachers.
Later, a carefully scrutinised audience was allowed to hear Mr Blunkett speak. He said he'd never attacked teachers, but had to speak for children being failed by the education system. That didn't satisfy everyone.
Do you believe that your own comments about failing schools and failing teachers have been helpful in an atmosphere when teaching has been under sustained and ruthless attack by the Tory government? Should not a failing government and not so-called failing teachers be the main target of your whole policy?
Mr Blunkett was also attacked for criticising the conference's decision to plan strikes over pay, but he stood his ground.
And I know what happens when people find that their kids aren't being educated in the name of better education. And I know what would happen. And the support would dwindle away. You don't want to hear this, but I'm giving it you. The support would dwindle away.
The union...
NUT leaders share Labour's coolness for strikes, but tomorrow delegates will repeat calls for strikes over school funding. Meanwhile, the Education Secretary sought political advantage from Labour's policy problems.
There is a lot of professional educational support for the main thrust of the government's reforms. That, of course, may have caused the Labour leadership to try to change its spots, but that won't wash. No wonder they're called hypocrites. They are.
The present dispute is very much about the way in which the government has significantly cut resources to our schools, and the Labour Party is unwilling to make a clear commitment to reverse those cuts and put more money into our schools.
Today's angry heckling of Mr Blunkett, albeit by a tiny minority, has served to underline the frustration felt by many teachers and the difficulty of finding any political solution. Mike Baker, BBC News, Blackpool.
A Spanish trawler arrested by the Royal Navy on suspicion of illegal fishing arrived in Plymouth earlier this evening. Local boats had sailed out to meet her, many of them flying the Canadian flag to show their support for Canada in the continuing row with Spain over fish quotas.
For Spanish fishermen, it's becoming uncomfortably familiar. One of their trawlers arrested at sea and escorted into port for investigation. This time it was the Royal Navy intercepting the Chimbote, their crew accused of using illegal undersized nets. British fishermen did little to disguise their hostility. They believe the move was long overdue.
There's no war against the Spaniards as such. Our war against anybody who doesn't want to conserve fish stocks for the future. They must be conserved, and if people flout the conservation rules and laws, then they must be prosecuted.
In Brussels, attempts to resolve the wider fish war between Spain and Canada failed overnight. The Spanish want their quota of Greenland halibut upped by 7,000 tonnes. Canada won't budge from 5,000. Deadlock was followed by insults.
Spain has repeatedly and systematically sabotaged attempts at agreement. For our part, we will go no further. We will make no more concessions.
And asked when there'd be more direct action by Canada against Spain, he said ominously, "Set your alarm clocks." Another ratcheting up of this dispute, which the British Fisheries Minister said today was understandable, but he was still hopeful compromise could replace conflict.
I don't accept that the talks have broken down. What I do accept is that they have been postponed pending further discussions. People are obviously considering very carefully their position. There are still some important points of detail to be resolved.
But the next development could again be on the seas, while a deal remains elusive. Matthew Amreliwala, BBC News.
The killing of a French soldier in Bosnia, the second in 2 days, has caused outrage in France. With the presidential elections imminent, questions are being raised about France's continued role in the UN peacekeeping mission. The soldier who died today was shot by a sniper in Sarajevo while building anti-sniper barricades. You may be disturbed by some of the pictures.
This morning, a year after the sniper barricades were taken down, French soldiers had begun to put them back again. It's an attempt to give some protection on Sarajevo's main city centre road, which now has people skittering for cover under lethal sniper fire. As the last container was levered into place, the forklift truck driver was shot at twice. Both bullets came through the cab, the second hitting him. The French unit returned fire. Just 3 shots is the rule. As his colleagues risked their lives around him, there was little that they, as UN soldiers, could do about the deteriorating situation.
We have a fairly robust response to sniping, and in this instance 3 rounds were returned, cannon rounds, to the area where the sniper fired from. But there are limitations on what we can really do.
Through the day, others were injured. 2 children and a Bosnian army soldier, for people are still on the streets. However, certain parts of the city are now becoming no-go areas. It's symptomatic of the increasing tension here and the unravelling of the ceasefire across the country. For the UN, there are growing questions of response, of their actual task here. The French Minister of Defence has arrived, also their Chief of Staff, their government expressing indignation and urging punishment on those it terms assassins. The body of a French soldier killed yesterday was flown out, to be followed by today's victim, the 58th Frenchman to die. Kate Adie, BBC News, Sarajevo.
The Sinn Féin leader, Gerry Adams, has indicated that there's no prospect of the IRA giving up its weapons even in the long term. Talks between Sinn Féin and Northern Ireland ministers have been held up over the government's demand that illegal weapons should be decommissioned.
Sinn Féin have been meeting civil servants since December, but government ministers have been unwilling to talk to them until they get more assurances that Republicans will seriously discuss the decommissioning of IRA arms. A compromise on paper is possible, but many people in Northern Ireland believe that in practice the IRA has no intention of handing over its weapons in the short, medium or long term. This was the reaction of the Sinn Féin president to that assessment.
I think that's a sensible view of the situation, but I think that the nub, the core of the problem isn't that. The core of the problem is the British government's refusal to acknowledge Sinn Féin's electoral mandate.
While it's still probably only a matter of time before government ministers do eventually meet Sinn Féin, Mr Adams' candid admission that the IRA has absolutely no plans to give up its arms won't make a compromise on the issue any easier to achieve. Tonight, Sinn Féin supporters on Belfast's Falls Road were putting bunting up ahead of tomorrow's Easter commemorations. Every year they mark the rising against the British in 1916. Historically, Republicans had never before handed over their guns. Whether anything short of that will satisfy the government is a question that lies at the heart of the current stalemate. Mark Devonport, BBC News, Belfast.
A huge security operation was mounted in Japan today after a major disaster was predicted by the Aum religious cult. The day passed without incident, but the warning was seen as a serious threat because of the cult's alleged links to last month's poison gas attack on the Tokyo underground.
The police were out in force on the streets of Tokyo on the direct order of Japan's Prime Minister, an indication of how seriously the warnings have been taken at the highest political level. The police presence was intense around Shinjuku Station, where, according to cult leaders, an unspecified catastrophe would be focused. Passengers were warned not to drink the water for fear it could be poisoned. Waste bins were sealed so they couldn't conceal gas bombs. Several stores decided to stay closed until any threat had passed. Those that did open reported trade at half its usual level. Near Osaka Airport, roadblocks were set up with cars and vans facing random checks. Around the country, 20,000 officers were involved in the security operation, but by nightfall there was no sign of the attack which they had feared. Peter Morgan, BBC News in Tokyo.
Ceremonies are underway in eastern Germany, marking the 50th anniversary of the liberation of Colditz Castle. Many former prisoners who made the castle legendary with their efforts to escape are boycotting the event. They're unhappy about what they see as moves to turn Colditz into a tourist attraction.
To most Germans, it's just a small town in Saxony, but to the British, one of the best-known places in all Germany. Before it was a prison for British officers, Colditz Castle was an outstation for the Buchenwald concentration camp. With the standard of the Berlin branch of the British Legion leading the way, today was a remembrance for all the victims of Colditz. These included Ukrainian, Serbian, French and Polish slave labourers who died in large numbers. A tablet on the cemetery wall honoured them. But the Colditz Association, representing the British prisoners of war, stayed away.
It's their town. It's for them to celebrate it as they wish. But please, I do not wish to be involved.
Cheers. Cheers. But one of the former British prisoners did take part, Thomas Elliot, now aged 79, who was captured at Dunkirk. He came in part because no one else would, and he felt the British should be represented. He shook hands with one of the Germans who once guarded him.
It was a commemoration for the people who lost their lives. And remember, we're not just the Colditz Castle for officers. We also had the political prisoners down here.
50 years on, the British were back in Colditz.
At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them. Martin Bell, BBC News, Colditz.
Now, with news of how Rangers secured the Scottish Championship again and the rest of the sport, here's Rob Bonnet.
Rangers today won their 7th successive Bells Premier Division Championship without even kicking a ball. The defeat of their Glasgow rivals Celtic by Aberdeen assuring Rangers continuing domination of Scottish football. Duncan Shearer scored one of the goals that ended the last remaining challenge to Rangers' supremacy.
Everybody's delighted to have won the championship again for another year. We have been a number of points ahead for the last few weeks, and it's always there's always a little bit of anxiety when you're going on and going week after week. But this weekend was the first weekend that we could actually have won it off our own back. So we're delighted going into tomorrow's game that we've already won a championship.
Aberdeen's win means they gain ground at the bottom on Dundee United, who lost 2-1 at home to Kilmarnock. Only the last club is automatically relegated. Partick won 1-0 at Hearts in the struggle to avoid the playoff. In England, the gap between the FA Carling Premiership leaders Blackburn Rovers and Manchester United has narrowed to 6 points. An injury-time equaliser from Leeds United's Brian Deane deprived Blackburn of the 3 points that Manchester United won at Leicester. Andy Cole scored twice in his side's 4-0 win. Blackburn remain firm favourites for the title nevertheless, though their remaining 5 fixtures look slightly more difficult than United's. The other clubs in the top 5 didn't play today. Elsewhere, an Ian Wright hat-trick helped clear any relegation worries for Arsenal as they beat Ipswich 4-1, while Mark Stein scored a vital winner for Chelsea against Aston Villa. It takes them above Villa in the group scrambling ahead of the 4 relegation places, though not beyond Southampton, who beat QPR 2-1. Leicester and Ipswich were already relegated. The 4 clubs above them didn't play. In the Ainsley First Division, the leaders Middlesbrough fell behind to Devon White's goal for the bottom club Notts County. But Middlesbrough saved a point with a late equaliser from their German substitute Uwe Schultz. And Wolves' hopes of winning automatic promotion suffered a setback at Charlton, who took control in the second half, Colin Walsh scoring their second. And soon after, Paul Mortimer made it 3-1 after a solo run from the halfway line. Wolves did rally late on with Steve Bull scoring his 200th league goal, but Charlton hung on for a 3-2 win. Despite the defeat, Wolves stay 4th, 7 points off an automatic promotion place. Tranmere beat Bolton yesterday, Barnsley beat Portsmouth today. Leicester Tigers have taken a crucial step towards ending Bath's dominance of English club rugby union, beating them this afternoon by 31 points to 21. Bath have won the Courage League Division 1 title for the last 4 seasons, but are now 2 points behind league leaders Leicester, with only 2 games to play.
With the Courage Championship almost certainly at stake, the first half was an ill-tempered, scrappy affair, redeemed only by the opportunism of Leicester's Jez Harris. His sharpness and the goal-kicking of John Lively earned them a 12-point first-half lead. And for most of the second half, Harris's accuracy was primarily responsible for maintaining what looked like being a comfortable lead. But Bath haven't won 4 successive titles by wilting in adversity. Typically, they responded with vigour, their determination to keep the ball moving eventually paying off as Adebayo squeezed over in the corner. The Tigers, however, had no intention of losing their quarry, Rory Underwood picking up the running theme and setting up yet another opportunity for that man Harris. With only minutes remaining, Leicester looked safe, but Bath refused to contemplate relinquishing their title, replying immediately with the sort of dynamic attack that's made them outstanding champions. England's Mike Catt going over to cut the deficit to just 3 points. But in the end, their desperation to get level tempted them into over-ambition. Gareth Adams' impression of an American quarterback presenting Rory Underwood with a decisive touchdown. With 2 games still to go, Bath's long reign isn't quite over, but it's odds on Leicester inheriting their title, if not yet their mantle. Kevin Geary, BBC News.
The John Dunlop train Subio won the day's most valuable racing prize, the bonus sprint Masaka Stakes at Kempton. Although the race is seen as a trial for the 1,000 guineas, Subio won't run in the Classic at Newmarket. Her next run will be in Germany after today's victory over Poppy Carew. And 2 of the leading challengers for the Embassy World Professional Snooker title, James Wattener and Ken Doherty, have been knocked out in today's first round. Peter.
And that's all from the newsroom tonight. Good night.
Good evening. 2 changes to the weather over the next 2 or 3 days. There'll be rain falling at some time almost everywhere, and after a frost-free night tonight, I think there'll be frost almost every other night this coming week, as far as we can see. This cloud at the moment is still dropping 1 or 2 shards of rain, if you like, but the real rain is still to come for Scotland and for Northern Ireland by dawn, and then throughout the rest of tomorrow through Northern England and much of Eastern and some parts of Southern England. There's the change, and by the end of Monday you see snow reappearing on the Scottish mountains. Well, the reason is that we're bringing in a northerly wind once again, and that's sweeping these fronts slowly south. It's a rather complicated affair, but what it really means is a largely cloudy start for Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England, mainly light rain moving southeast into East Anglia and much of central and southern England. Brighter weather following, but in that brighter weather, so the showers will turn increasingly wintry and the wind will become increasingly strong, rather poor condition for the Scottish mountains. That'll continue on Easter Monday, bright and sunny for most other places, but it will cloud up once again for Wales and the southwest of England.
Medical drama in just a moment here on BBC One, as a controversial choice of organ donor causes public outrage at Chicago Hope. Just before that, here's an update on today's National Lottery draw. The 6 winning numbers are confirmed as 1, 4, 6, 23, 26, 49, and the bonus number is 8. Preliminary indications are that there are 4 jackpot winners, each winning an estimated £2.4 million.
Stress. I remember the time long ago when the most important people were the patients.
If you save him, he'll love you. If you don't, what's he going to do about it?
Pressure.
Babe alert, casualty, repeat, babe alert, casualty.
So, what's a joint like this doing in a nice girl like you?
Tension. He had a heart attack and collapsed lung and he stopped breathing twice. I think he's now qualified for a hospital bed. Emergency.
We got a star in. The hospital manager collapsed at the conference. He'll be dead then. He wasn't much more active when he was alive.
All the symptoms of a cardiac arrest. The new series Wednesday at 9:30 on BBC One.
This evening, which show stars the biggest and smoothest entertainer?
Calm down, chaps. We don't want the ladies to spontaneously combust.
An all-round good guy.
Yeah, I'm looking for red-hot action.
The Lenny Henry Show.
Recognize me now?
In 45 minutes.
Drama now on BBC One, as a radical heart transplant operation creates an ethical dilemma at Chicago Hope, with a controversial decision to use a living donor who has no say in the matter.
Previously on Chicago Hope.
I've been developing